It is that time. It is that time. You are watching the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is obviously Jamal Thomas. But yes, sir. Set. Everybody is good. I hope you guys are good. Or at least having a decent, relatively moderately decent morning. Wherever you are, if you're under the sound of this voice, you have my appreciation for being so. If you're under the sound of this voice, you have my appreciation for being so. And obviously, today is the first day since the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding. The Memorandum of Understanding is supposedly in full force as we speak, and yet it's not. Why, Jamal, is the Memorandum of Understanding not in full force? Obviously, Pezeshkian signed it. Obviously, Donald Trump signed it. These things were signed. So why is it not in full force? The reason it's not in full force is because Israel violated the agreement immediately with its incursion and attacks in Lebanon. Now, for these incursion and attacks, they got ambushed with 5 of their soldiers, at least what I'm hearing reporting on the ground, 5 of their soldiers killed, not to mention God knows how many wounded, several tanks blown up. But that's besides the point. God bless Hezbollah for doing so. I'm pointing out that the agreement that the United States signed was to get its dog in order. Get your mutt in line. Your mutt is peeing on the yard. Don't pretend like that mutt is not yours. Don't act like the girl with the skinny legs. It's not yours. The girl with the skinny legs is yours. Claim it. And the U.S. is acting as if Israel is some rogue actor. Now, Iran, for their part, said this is an outrage. The deal has been violated. We are now suspending any notion of this deal, meaning this deal is voided until further notice. The Strait, I would ideally think, remains closed. I would think. Now, mind you, it's going to take several weeks to open the Strait anyway. But now, definitely, from the Iranian point of view, you violated the agreement. Now, to me, this was always the interesting part. I don't care about Trump dropping an F-bomb with Netanyahu. I don't care with all of this talk about a rift between the United States and Israel. I don't care. I don't care. What I care about is what happens in physical matter reality in this sense. What happens next? A, does Iran attack Israel? There's that. If Iran does not attack Israel, does it lose credibility? There's that. If it loses credibility, does that create further predation by the U.S. and by Israel? Again, I don't believe Israel is going rogue. I told you that. I don't believe the stuff of, oh, Trump and Netanyahu are at odds, and oh my God, I don't believe that stuff. That's drama. What I believe is, do we continue to send billions? Do we continue to send weapons? Do we continue to protect in the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly? Do we continue to go into court and claim that they have the right to starve their populations? Do we turn a blind eye to them gang raping and getting put on the rape list from a standpoint of the United Nations? Do we continuously turn a blind eye to these things as they continue to ethnically cleanse in southern Lebanon? And when Iran points it out, hey, this is a violation, what does the U.S. do? This boils down to 2 parts. One, Iran's necessity of maintaining credibility of their threats and of their actions, meaning on some level, you have to respond. How you respond, but obviously you have to respond. And sending a strongly worded letter saying we're no longer working with the Memorandum of Understanding is not going to do it. Shutting down the Strait and maintaining the Strait closure until every tenet of the agreement is agreed upon, that sounds more right. Will they do that? I don't know. I would point out to you, though, that any loss of credibility will only further predation. Full stop. Humble advice from a person who's in a country run by psychopaths and who's very familiar with its monsters. On the other front, if Iran does respond with closing the strait, what does the US do? Donald Trump was obviously behind the eight ball in dealing with Iran in this case, hence promising everything into the future. We've done this before. We'll do it again. Promising doesn't mean anything. Things that are further into the future have the potential of going even further still or just not materializing at all. So obviously, Iran can't necessarily take anything the US says seriously or with any sort of, let's say, credibility. If Iran closes the strait or if Iran smashes Israel, what does the US do? See, this is the focal point for me. What does the US do? Does the US go back bombing, or does the US actually pulls the leash on its dog? Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. And maybe fascinating, it shouldn't necessarily be the word for it, but Lord knows it is. The Israelis, the Israeli firsters, all of these people have been screaming their heads off. And fair enough, I understand it. They believe in Israel more than they believe in their own country. These people are treasonous, these people are traitors, whether they're in government. And I suppose they would have to be in government. They don't necessarily have to be in the population, but doubly so when they're in governmental offices trying to push the US to do something that is not in the US best interest. Again, I made this point before, I would probably make it again. If Donald Trump had a military solution where he could kill 10,000 babies and 10,000 women as they held those babies, he would have done it. He would have done it to avoid signing this document, because this document makes it clear that America has limits, and those limits were being tested through economic, let's say, economic leverage that Iran was effectively wielding through closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And mind you, they could have escalated from that and closing other straits. I'm just pointing out that this was a show of weakness by Trump in regards to the first iteration of the skirmish. This war isn't over. But the Israeli firsters and Israelis have gotten so accustomed to getting everything that they want that when they get the red Benz, they kick the car and say, we wanted a blue one as a child, and go running back into the mansion. I see my guests is here, so I'm going to end this. My point is, the question is, what happens now? The man of our John Helmer. How you doing, John? You doing okay well, it's not this morning for you, but you doing okay today?
I'm fine, thank you, Jamal. Lots of things to talk about. Yes.
Yes.
And I'll tell you whether I'm feeling good at the end or I'm not feeling good. But then that depends on our audience.
With just a basic. There we are.
Go ahead.
Oh, fair enough. Let's start off with a very basic question. Is the Iran-US Memorandum of Understanding the new Minsk agreements for the Iranians?
The best way I can answer that, Jamal, is not to compare this with other international papers like you just said. We'll come back to why I'm saying that. What I invite all of us to do, especially those who are in countries where having elections, that's United States and Russia, and in a certain sense, Iran. The best way of interpreting the MOU is in terms of the factional politics which drive each of the parties to their negotiating position, okay? So if you read the terms and the actions on the ground, and most recently, because I've just done a Dances with Bears piece on J.D. Vance's version, if you read the MOU in terms of US politics, you read it in terms of constituency politics, principally, as Vance has just gone and declared, the Christians versus the Jews. We'll come back to that in a minute. If you read the MOU in terms of what President Putin has said yesterday and what's happening in Moscow today, we'll come back to that in a minute, you understand the factional politics in Russia. Do not see the MOU as a replay of the Minsk agreement. What Russia sees it in factional terms, not in Russian factional terms, as the possibility for a solution to the Ukraine war that is bitterly opposed by different factions in the Kremlin. But we'll come back to that in a minute. Do you want to start with a reading of the MOU in terms of US politics, or do you want to start in terms of Russian politics?
Let's start in terms of Russian politics, because I understand it why they're doing it for the US. The Russian side of it, I'm super interested in how they view it.
Well, I don't think the US reactions are all that clear. And that's why I've gone today to describe J.D. Vance as using the MOU to basically start his campaign for the presidency of the United States. He's now running as a Roman Catholic against the Jews. This is really unprecedented in US presidential history and very unusual. The way he said it is being highlighted in the US press because he attacked Israel.
To see what you're referring to.
Pardon?
So let me play this. This is Vance basically lighting into Israel for attacking Trump's deal. This is France. Let's see if I can get this play.
Seen people within Bibi's cabinet who have come out and attacked the deal, and in some ways very personally attacked the president of the United States. And I guess my message to them would be twofold. Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. What I will say.
That's new.
That is a new. Well, there are several things he said there. I'd like to point out that what he's revealing is a national secret, a state secret. He's basically saying there's no head of state in the world that defends and has a high opinion of Israel. Now, publicly, that's not true, is it? You can't think of a head of government, not even President Putin, which will express opposition to the present Israeli government. Okay? However, what he's saying is what they say in public isn't what they think in private. He's revealing what he knows. And of course, what the Israelis know, that that is almost, if you're in the state of Florida or in the country of France or on the streets of London, that's almost criminal anti-Semitism. He's basically saying the private opinion of the heads of government and state around the world, all of them except us, except Trump, except Vance, think as he's just expressed. Now, that's really unusual. But he goes on to say a couple of other things, one of which I beg everybody listening to go watch the interview he gave to Ross Douthat, I don't know how to pronounce the name, a columnist for the New York Times. He did that a few hours either before that press conference or immediately after, because that's where he says the following thing. I'll just read it out because it's really dramatic. And I put it in today's Dances with Bears. Those of you out there who read or want a long read after you've had a long listen to this. Vance said, "You're a country of 9 million people. You can't just kill your way out of solving every single national security problem that you have." Repeat, You can't just kill your way out of solving every single national security problem you have. That's never been said quite so bluntly. And he says it in the context of discussion of his Roman Catholicism, his conversion, his belief, and his support of Pope Leo. Okay? Now, what's happening there, read it in Factional Politics. I'd like to emphasize he's running against Israel. He makes it look as if it's the defense minister Ben-Gvir and the finance minister Smotrich, but he's basically, everybody knows that the Israeli regime expresses through Smotrich and Ben-Gvir what Netanyahu's actually doing. And right now, today, as a result of what they all think, they ran more than a dozen bombing attacks in southern Lebanon. And as a result of that, today's beginning of meetings at the technical level for implementing the MOU have been postponed by the Iranians, okay? So it's had a dramatic effect immediately. Now, the US press, starting with the New York Times, is so angry that Vance is running this line against the Israelis in Israel and the Jewish bloc around Trump, that they've begun to attack and emphasize those remarks in Vance's briefing. Okay, I can explain why Vance is running like this. You look at the polls, and we can explain that if you want to, in US polling terms. You just got to remember, and this isn't just an American feature, it's Russian too. Politicians are engineered. When they run races, they're under engineering control. And the engineering we're talking about is essentially somewhere between an AI hallucination and a robot. What makes them engineered to say what they do are the polls. Now, we can come back to that later. What I need to emphasize is the other interpretation, the other meaning of what Vance had to say. Yes, he's running against Israel. There's no doubt about that. As a Catholic, and he's got to get back votes from Catholics. The polls show this. He's got to get back votes from women. He's got to show he's different from Trump. Those are the basic themes he was hitting there while looking loyal. This is the way presidential candidates run like that, or vice presidents. However, he made it very clear he does not support the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from southern Lebanon. He makes it very clear he does support and wiping out Hezbollah, wiping them out. I can read you what he said. This is a clear violation. I'm looking down at my copy of the 14-point memo. It's a clear violation of point 1. Point 1 in the MOU. Do you mind if we go through this? And then we'll come to the Russian position, which is also surprising.
No, we can totally go through it. I am fascinated by that memorandum, because you're right.
Okay, so point 1,
Lebanon, yeah.
It says, has to be a permanent termination of military ops on all fronts, including Lebanon. And then it says the parties, that's Iran and the United States, will ensure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. Now, Vance has just defined sovereignty of Lebanon as meaning without Hezbollah. I mean, it's very clear. He's in favor of wiping them out. He's in favor of this formula that the Lebanese government's army will move to the south, of course, with the assistance of the Israelis and the Americans, to wipe Hezbollah out. That does not mean Israeli withdrawal. It does not mean Lebanese sovereignty. It does mean the Vice President of the United States is violating point 1 of the agreement he claims credit for negotiating, on the basis that Hezbollah, which is an elected party in the government of Lebanon, is not an elected party in Lebanon. Okay, that's point 1. Point 3, he doesn't talk about. That's the removal of the naval blockade. Now, it says here point 3, that the US will begin the removal of its naval blockade and will fully end the naval blockade within 30 days. That isn't right now. And what CENTCOM has just gone and announced is that it's not moving its naval forces away from the area. It's staying there. It's lifting the blockade, but not removing any forces. And it's reserving the right to, as it were, continue to operate if it defines any form of threat from Iran. And we know they invent such threats. Now, Vance doesn't talk about the timing of the removal. He does talk about the lifting of sanctions and the release of Iranian funds. Now, quickly, there are at least $100 billion worth of Iranian state funds, state reserves, gold, and investments and revenue earnings that have been frozen over the years. 2 billion, only 2 billion in the United States, almost tiny. However, 6 billion are in Qatar. They came as Iranian oil earnings to South Korea. They were moved from South Korea to Qatar some time back. I don't know, I can't remember the details. The point is that the Israelis and others have been indicating, and it was published yesterday in the Financial Times of London from US officials, that 6 billion of Iranian cash and assets, pardon me, in Qatar will be released on condition that the money will be spent in the United States buying food. So the US officials briefing the FT said yesterday, well, the Iranians will get their Qatari money on condition they help pay for the petrol and the fuel and the fertilizer of US farmers. Okay, that's the deal. It sounds just the kind of deal that people like Witkoff and Kushner would come up with. And they'll get a commission. Those guys will get a commission and a kickback from American farmers for doing that. However, Vance said it's completely untrue in his briefing. He just said it. In fact, he said there'll be no release of any funds, not a down payment, not nothing, not anything. Sorry, English is getting too excited. English is getting away from me. So those are two examples where, and I could go on. I invite people to read the piece because you can see how many of the points of the memorandum Vance has just admitted he is himself violating in the terms which US officials below him are briefing the Western press that the Iranians have accepted. So Iran has to say to itself, we can see there's an Israeli faction that continues to bomb in South Lebanon. Basically, the argument that Trump and Vance have said is that the Israelis should lay off the air bombing while we get on with the rest of the negotiations, but they don't mean withdrawal from Lebanon. That poses a factional problem inside Iran. How much do the Iranian differences of opinion, foreign ministry, Mr. Arakchi, Mr. Ghalibaf, the lead negotiator, Speaker of Parliament, the IRGC, the military commanders, and so on, how much do they differ on what the Lebanon point we've just mentioned are? There'll be going to be factions who say, let's go as far as we can to get as much money back as we can, which is why I've mentioned the 6 billion that US officials say will be released on condition they go into US farmers' pockets. While Vance says that's completely untrue. Okay, so we have factional differences in the US, which are going to be emphasized in coming days because Vance has gone against Israel. But you've got to read the small print. You've got to listen to what Vance is saying to realize he wants the US empire to still control everything, including no withdrawal of the US troops and forces from all their land bases, not from the one that's been blown up in Kuwait, not from the one that's been blown up in Bahrain, not from the ones that have been attacked in Iraq and in other places. In other words, Vance is different. That's true. Vance is running against Israel as a Roman Catholic. He's just made it clear that's true too. But he's not in favor of diminishing the U.S. empire. The U.S. empire. Now, in an interpretation, I better speak more softly and quietly and calmly. It's a common interpretation in the podcast world. You're different, Jamal. You're independent. That Israel is the dog and America is the tail. That Netanyahu is the big dog and Trump and Vance, of course, are the small tails that wag. This isn't what Vance is running against. And frankly, we can have an argument about whether US factional politics turn out this way. But let's be clear. The individual who's got the best chance of being the next president of the United States is now running against the Jewish bloc around Trump and against Israel. But it doesn't mean he's running a campaign that has a profoundly different view of Iran. Another point, and I'll quickly move on to Russia if you let me. Another point is he's running as the Catholic candidate, the peace candidate. That's fine, except he also implies in his briefing he's all in favor of having murdered the Iranian leadership starting on February 28th. In fact, he talks about it. We're now able to talk to the current Iranian leadership, which is practical, and we're able to talk with them. Implied meaning, we're glad that our bombing campaign and the Israeli attacks got decapitated that military leadership we couldn't deal with, and that fellow, the supreme leader, we didn't like, so we killed him. Well, the Israelis killed him. So it's a very complicated factional run, which you can interpret strictly according to the polls. And what he has to do, he now must run against Trump because he's losing in the poll in the Republican Party nomination to guess who? Donald Trump Jr. He's rising in the polls. So that's the factional lineup there. Now, if you figure everybody could be scratching their heads, so I recommend you have a drink. It helps clear the mind. If you look at this situation in the US in the way American political engineers and media and experts like you, Jamal, look at it, it's pretty complicated, right? Could be confusing if you're a foreigner, okay? So what if you're Russian? And that was where you asked me to begin with. If you're Russian...
But before you get to Russian...
Okay.
Is this a trap? I mean, look, I am not of mind that any U.S. president is going to give up empire, which means whether it's Vance, whether it's Trump, whether it's anybody else, I don't really believe them when they say that stuff. Is this a trap then, in the way that this is engineered, the memorandum of understanding?
Well, a trap, yes, and no. Here's why I say that. Let's just say from the Iranian point of view, because lots of colleagues and friends of mine are clearly saying and writing, and I understand why they are saying Iran shouldn't have signed this. The President Pezeshkian shouldn't have signed it. Well, just to answer your question, it's not. Iran needs to prove several things and maintain its war aims. So let's say it needs to prove that there's nothing the American side puts on the table that can be trusted. After the performance of Witkoff and Kushner last year, they need to convince Iranian people that they're doing their best for an economy, which is seriously hurting all Iranians, right? So they have to convince Iranians, we're trying hard, we're trying to get some money back. And they're trying to get $6 billion out of Qatar, even for American food. I mean, whatever food they're going to buy, it will help lower prices in a situation of high inflation. So they're trying to establish to the Iranian constituencies that the terms they've agreed to betray no one, especially and starting with Iranian people. If there's a trap, they say, you need to see the document, folks, their own voters, their own people, and see if the Americans are already betraying their own agreements. Our answer is, in the last 24 hours, they are doing exactly that.
Yes.
So from an Iranian point of view, you could say they set a trap. They negotiated tenaciously. They had arguments among themselves. There must have been an argument from the Iranian military side to say, look, to hell with this test. How many more tests do we need to make? Haven't we learned from 2 rounds of war? The only thing the other side understands, Israelis or Americans, is force. So we have the chokehold over Hormuz. We must not give that up right now. And then let's say Foreign Minister Arakchi, Speaker Ghalibaf have said, well, that's true. On the other hand, if we trade an opening of the Hormuz and an agreement not to charge tolls for 30 days, and we get back a value in our own money of more than the money we could have charged tankers to go out through the straits, and we can sell our own oil for 30 days, aren't we making a net cash gain, which we can plow into our somewhat desperate, sanctioned, war-torn economy? So don't the sides say, let's compromise? I'm just inventing this. I'm speculating. But if you look at the terms, it's a reasonable deal from the Iranian point of view for 30 days. 30 days. And already the violations that the Israelis are pushing are so obvious. The start of the Geneva negotiations have been postponed. That's a nice, polite, diplomatic way of saying they've been cancelled because of Israeli violations, because US approves it. Okay.
Yes. I think that I don't believe like these people who are like, oh my God, Donald Trump is fighting with Netanyahu. Oh my God, there's a rift. It's like we've seen this before. This happened during the Biden administration. This has happened with Trump. This has happened all the way through. No, I agree with you. I think the US approves it. I think this is the US way of testing, let's say, Iran's credibility around the issue of Lebanon, trying to pry Lebanon away.
Iran is testing the US. But if you ask me, as you did at the beginning, what's the Russian assessment?
Yes.
The Russian assessment. Well, the problem in Russia is that Russia has a big war that's still underway. And in the last few hours, you've seen massive drone attack on Moscow. Not an especially damaging attack comparable to what has been done in Kiev, but the Ukrainians are trying to show that nothing that the Russian side has been able to do to damage their Ukrainian military capacity, nothing the Russian side is attempting to establish as demilitarizing the Ukraine and preventing drone war attacking Russia. Nothing like that's working. And they pull it off just as the G7 meeting in France signs a statement, which, by the way, President Trump signed, which says, I'll just read it out if I can reach for it. The G7 statement says, we commit to increase the pressure on the Russian war economy. We consider this the right moment to proceed with additional measures as President Trump has delivered a deal we support in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump signed that. Anyone who says Trump is being misled by the Europeans is cuckoo. And that's a polite way of saying what they are. But let me explain as answer to your question. You've got there Moscow, right? This is the damage done in Moscow.
That's the picture from
right.
Moscow.
This is visual propaganda designed to reinforce the Trump G7 statement. But the factional lineup in Moscow is as follows. President Putin doesn't say there's a problem with the Trump MOU with Iran. What he said a few hours ago in a summit meeting with the ASEAN countries, which include a big Muslim country, Indonesia. This is what he said. It's very simple. We believe that the fact that the document, meaning the MOU, was signed by the heads of state, President Trump and President Pezeshkian, provide grounds for expecting it to become a serious and substantive foundation for future agreements. We hope the situation in the Middle East will stabilize and Persian Gulf will stabilize, which would, among other things, have a positive effect on global energy and food markets. Either you consider that so vague as to be meaningless, then you say, why wasn't he warning? Why wasn't he the slightest bit skeptical that an American signed MOU with Trump's signature might be broken and might therefore become a test of Trump's credibility? Mightn't you say, if you're the president of Russia fighting a war against the United States, say, we look to Trump to prove his signature on that document is credible for the peace in that region, because if it isn't, we can't trust him on the Ukraine. Mightn't you say that, Jamal? If you were advising President Putin, I would, and I've just said
I would have been far more aggressive.
So,
yes.
Next point. The factional lineup in Moscow is Putin, his foreign affairs advisor, Yuri Ushakov, his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, and his central bank governor, Elvira Nabiullina, and his finance minister and a bunch of others who are less important. Ushakov has said, and this is just now in the last few hours, Trump was prior to the signing of the G7 statement. Ushakov doesn't say Trump signed it. He says Trump has been fed, quotes, unhelpful, if not harmful ideas by the Europeans. Excuse me. Then what does Kirill Dmitriev, who's the representative of the president for negotiating the enrichment of the Trump family to facilitate a deal on Ukraine? What does he tweets every few hours? What has he said about the Iranian MOU? I tell you what he says. The answer, tweet, good. And what's he referring to? An Axios report by the Israeli reporter Barak David, who is the only person Dmitriev quotes, an Israeli mouthpiece in Axios, who's a notorious misinformation. I mean, everybody in the audience knows what Axios is. Everybody, except Kirill Dmitriev, doesn't want to insult the Israelis, wants to break the news about the MOU, not from Iran, but from an Israeli mouthpiece in Washington. And he calls that good, right? That's all he has to say about the MOU. Let's come on to some of the other Russian factional alignment with President Putin. It's just happened an hour ago. The central bank governor, Elvira Nabiullina, has been absent on sick leave or absent for political reasons as she has been arguing with Putin against the military faction in town over, first, whether Russia's in recession or not, and how much, and let's be clear, we've talked about it before, Russia is in serious recession. I mean, today's report is that steel construction is down 10% in the first quarter of this year. That's bad, folks. That's very bad. Anyway, what Nabiullina has been saying is we've got to keep the interest rate high to keep inflation low, And she supports cutting the budget deficit by cutting military expenditures and therefore reducing our ability to fight the war on the Ukraine battlefield. So what she's just done,
insane.
Well,
She's insane.
What? It's a factional lineup here, and President Putin supports her. It's just been announced the central bank governors meeting has reduced the key rate, which was 14.5%, which kills the economy and is lengthening the recession. It's just been reduced by 25 basis points from 14.5% to 14.25%. Wow, is that going to save the? We're in an election, a midterm election, you could call it in September, mid-September. We're going to have State Duma election, and people are feeling the pinch across the country. And she's just improved the credit situation and stimulated the economy with an interest rate of 14.25%. But here's what the press release says. She says this is amazing. Quotes, a higher key rate path than assumed will be likely. Why? Because, quotes, fiscal policy will be more accommodative than previously expected. Translate that. Any fool can translate that. What she means is that the increased spending on the war will increase the budget deficit, which she calls accommodative fiscal policy. But if that's happening, she's going to jack up the interest rate. So she's saying, she's basically saying to President Putin, you want to continue the war by increasing expenditure, increasing the budget deficit? I'm going to jack up the interest rate. So I'm going to kill the civilian economy. Have you ever heard anything like that in the middle of an election campaign? It's amazing. Okay, so summing it up, what we have is around Putin are Nabiullina, Silvanov, the finance minister, Dmitriev, the bribester in chief with the United States, Ushakov and others, who are saying we've got to reach an accommodation with Trump, and we're not going to criticize anything he does. Okay? Now, the military services, the intelligence services, the general staff, and the foreign ministry all think this is absolutely wrong. They are scathing. Personally, I won't use expletives, but I know that high-level Russian officials in that faction are scathing about Dmitriev. They also believe that the restrictions being placed on the general staff are so severe that they make it very, very difficult to defend the country from this sort of drone attack. So nobody in Russia is
infuriating.
You.
It is infuriating to hear this. I'm sorry to interrupt. It is very infuriating to hear this. From my point of view, there's no way to make an accommodation with the U.S. Like there's maybe in the 80s, maybe, at some point in the future when it's very dispiriting to hear that. As somebody who wants the U.S. to lose for my own reasons in regards to being in this country and being sick of, and I'm saying that as a patriot, right? Like, I don't want us succeeding, murdering a bunch of kids in the first attack in Iran in an unprovoked war of aggression. I don't want us doing that with Russia. I don't want us doing it with any country. And so succeeding breeds this behavior. I don't want this behavior to breed. I want strategic defeat and failures, whether it's in Ukraine or for that matter, whether it's in Iran. So hearing Putin, who, if he really believes that he can get an accommodation with the United States, he is out of his mind. I don't know why he believes that.
I'll tell you why he believes that. Because as a politician, I've been following President Putin since he came in 2020. I actually dealt with him in 1991 when he was the bagman for the mayor of Leningrad at the time. So he is, in his mind, a balancer, a balancer. He balances between different factions, advising him on what to do. And I mean, I'm not promoting myself, but I've written lots of books and thousands of goddamn articles explaining how all this works, how he makes decisions, okay? Without boring everybody. The problem that Putin has and has right now is you can't balance opposites. You can't. How do you balance between a faction telling you to advance and a faction telling you or advising you to retreat? You can't balance between victory and defeat. You can't balance between trust and deceit. You just said it, Jamal. If Trump and Vance running different campaigns with different factional voter constituencies have just clearly within a few hours demonstrated these violations of the MOU, how can a balancer balance trust in Trump or Vance, for that matter, or Witkoff and Kushner on the one hand, and Russia's war aims to defend itself not from Ukrainians, not from a Kiev regime, but from the combination of the US and Europe. The US and Europe have just signed on, I'll just read it again, we commit to increase the pressure on the Russian war economy. How can you balance with them? How can you balance with Trump? Why did Yuri Ushakov say less than 24 hours ago, where basically Witkoff and Kushner are welcome in the Kremlin. We're looking forward to having them back. And unfortunately, they're being delayed because they're preoccupied with the Iran settlement. Excuse me, mightn't you say we can't have them back because they've proven to be liars and deceit mongers? We can't have them back. Let them prove on the Iranian portfolio for which they're currently responsible that they can be trusted to honor anything they say. Why doesn't Ushakov say we welcome them back when they prove their words worth something? Instead, we won't have them back while they're lying their heads off and deceiving them and us. Well, that's not what Ushakov is saying. What President Putin, you ask, why is he mad? How can, well, the answer is in politics, politicians think they can say contradictory things out of different sides of their mouth. And President Putin's had 26 years as president of Russia doing that.
That is, like I said, it's dispiriting here. From my point, we are psychopaths, and you have to treat us accordingly. Meaning, there is nothing that we've done with Russia that has been, let's say, honest, any more than what we're doing with Iran is honest. We should be. Who needs to win this war? Who needs to win this war? That's my point. It is not going to be won with some kind of deal with the United States. He needs to win it on the battlefield. It's just dispiriting me for this, because what we hear when we hear this moderation from Russia is they are weak. That's all we hear. It invites predation. And okay, how is Russia regarding the MOU? Meaning, are they, and you answered that in regards to the various people who are talking about it. But and what time is it? What time is it? Okay, I guess this will be the last question. Moving forward, what are your expectations of this? You said you wouldn't compare this to the Minsk agreements. What would you compare it to? Because as you point out, we're violating it immediately, day one. If not the Minsk. Minsk was also violated immediately. Minsk also was used as this kind of trap in order to allow the repositioning of forces, etc. Why wouldn't you compare this to the Minsk agreements?
Well, I didn't. I said I'm trying to interpret the MOU in terms of US factional politics, in Russian factional politics, and you raised a very good question, Iranian factional politics, when you asked, is this all a trap? Okay.
Yes.
The reason I didn't want to compare it to Minsk is we weren't actually saying, what does the example, and you just answered your own question, as an example of deceit, as an example of buying time, so for deceitful purposes, there's a strong similarity between the MOU and the Minsk agreements. However, President Putin committed to the Minsk agreements, and he's now committing to the MOU with all the Minsk agreement experience that President Putin admits. He now admits that Chancellor of Germany Merkel and French President Hollande and the others all agreed on Minsk in order to buy time to increase the fortifications and build up Ukrainian battlefield to attack Russia. So President Putin's clear about that. Now his problem is that Trump is his Elvira Nabiullina's, Kirill Dmitriev's, golden-haired boy, not the golden dome, the golden idol that will somehow deliver Russia's balanced budget, Russia's low inflation rate, Russia's peace in Europe, when in fact Trump has just signed, we increased the pressure on the Russian economy, and you usefully just showed some pictures. The pictures of the attack on the Moscow refinery are mostly for publicity, but as were the attacks on the St. Petersburg refinery and the Kirishi refinery out of town in St. Petersburg, to demonstrate the Ukrainian escalation. Doesn't mean they're winning the war. It means that they're capable of doing damage to the Russian economy, exactly as the G7 has just agreed to. And why? In order to convince Russian voters the Russian army's failing. Why? Because Russian support for President Putin at the polls depends on Russian confidence in the Russian army. The correlations are tight there. The correlation there is different. In the United States, there's a very clear correlation between the price of oil and the price of gas at the pump and approval ratings for Trump and Vance.
Yes.
And there's a tight correlation between disapproval, net disapproval of Trump and net disapproval of Vance. So why did, what's his name? Vance, sorry, I'm getting too excited. Why did Vance talk about gas price and oil price? Because he knows he has got to deliver lower gas prices if he's to become a credible candidate for the presidency. So the tight correlations, sorry, I use a sociological scientific term, but everybody should understand the tight relationship in political engineering here. And Trump's running for election, Vance is running for election, Putin's running for election, and you can see the engineering. It sticks out. Well, I won't use some. It's
John,
obvious.
Let's just. You are fantastic. Great breakdown.
No, it's nothing like that, Jamal. Look, we've got to look at the way this deception works. We've got to understand these guys are Russian guys, American guys, are predictable, very predictable. And we've got to figure if they're predictable, okay, we're all sitting at home wishing and hoping, but this is so predictable, we can basically come to a conclusion. There's not much hope here, folks. Does that mean you got to turn off your device, stop listening? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think we turn off our device to stop listening, but it does behoove us to have. I think people who cover this stuff get accustomed to it, but I don't think the larger public does. Meaning, I don't know if the larger public knows what you know. Hence, the breakdown is necessary. No, I don't think we turn off. I think I don't know. And from my point of view, it's a stay tuned type of thing.
Well, there's
So,
another point. I could be wrong. I could have just put all this stuff together, and maybe you've got some listeners who want to ask us questions, or maybe the stream of commenters say the old guy's an old fart and he's wrong. Okay, fine. I might be wrong. So let's look at the evidence. Read a bit. Tell me how you, Jamal, or I'm wrong in reading the way this is going.
no, it's your model. It's just your model of the world. It's how you frame it. And you're just the man. So of course you could be wrong, but the logic works in regards to the way they're behaving and the way they're acting, which is the thing that is the determining factor in whether a model is helpful or not. And I define your model as beneficial and helpful. So, but John, Dances with Bears, I will put the article below. In fact, I had pulled the article up, but I will put that article below for the audience in the video after I cut it. You have a great rest of your day, man. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jamal. See you next time.
Absolutely, man. Be safe. All right. Shout out to John Helmer. John Helmer is a fantastic guest. I always appreciate him. I see my man Carl is in the background. And by the way, John is, I think he's right on this. Carl, give me 1 second. I'm pulling you up now. Yes, I need a producer. Every time you guys see me do stuff like this, or every time you see me looking in the corner or something like that, I'm making adjustments on the computer, pulling up articles and everything else. If I had a producer, I would not have to do that. And yes, I do want a producer, which is why I keep pointing that out. Carl Ja, let me bring him to the stage. The man himself. How you doing, Carl? You doing okay this evening for you?
How are you, Jamal?
I'm doing well, man, and better that you were with me. And for the audience to know, by the way, just Carl Ja. Carl Ja is host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions, their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Ja. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk with the letter N. And you can subscribe to support the podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl, the reason that I hit you up is because obviously I read on subjects all across the world just because the show focuses on stuff all across the world. And I came across this thing about the US getting far more engaged in the Philippines with obviously drone warfare and these type of things. The reason this perked my interest was because drones seemed to be the new super weapon. And I don't mean it in the sense of like a nuke. I mean it in the sense of the ability to tie down militaries, the ability to deter people going into certain areas, the ability to hit, let's say, people, like, for example, Israel right now is being chewed alive by Hezbollah. Apparently 5 were killed, and I mentioned several tanks blowing up and everything else in attacks that Hezbollah ran. Hezbollah has been able to hit them at night and during the daytime. And you've had Israelis bitching in the United Nations. When we're invading and trying to kill women and children, they're killing us with drones. This is unfair. Right? Like, meaning a military that is funded to the tune of billions against a resistance force is on some level being tied down when they are going on the ground. Drones is a new device. Even in Ukraine, Ukrainians are, obviously Russians are advancing, but Ukrainian and their lost manpower, drones are making up the gap on some level. The US is basically integrating the Philippines with additional armaments and drone warfare. This is on top of this Philippines-Japan corridor that they're trying to create, which again is aimed directly at China and this notion of controlling certain parts of the ocean. Give me your take on this in general. I mean, like, this, I know China has this belief, and we can talk about it if you want, of if nothing changes, we would just sail into the future and the world will be fantastic. The US doesn't believe that. Should China have a bit of concern?
Okay, so it's really I was waiting for your question, but it's really you're just giving me like a it's just very general. You're just asking me my take on a very general happening. I mean, like, this is nothing new, right? I mean, it's for drones itself. Drones is now an essential part of the 21st century warfare, as we have seen in the Ukraine war, which is, the Ukraine war and the latest Persian Gulf War is really the only real 21st century war that we know. And what drones enable the combatants do is to wage asymmetric warfare. No longer you can use very cheaply made assembled drones to go against opponents who are much more powerful, much more have like $1 billion worth of equipments, right? So this is a reality all countries are adjusting to, including the United States. Now, Philippines. Well, Philippines has always been the linchpin of the U.S. strategy to contain China. Again, that's nothing new. And what is new is in the aftermath of the recently just concluded war in Persian Gulf, when the U.S. empire has been exposed as paper tiger that it is. I mean, this is why the MOU was signed in Versailles. It's a document of surrender. This is unambiguous Iranian victory. In light of this, a lot of countries are now making adjustment. Because it destroys the premises that U.S. is going to come to your aid. U.S. got your back. U.S. have a security umbrella that will protect you. All that assumption has been blown to pieces by Iranian drones and missiles. And Philippines is exception to that. Because, every other country, whether South Korea or they're secretly going back to the drawing boards because we're now anticipating a new security arrangement in the aftermath of Trump's surrender to Iran. Philippines, though, it's special in a way because, first of all, Philippines was a U.S. colony until World War II, and some argue it's still very much a U.S. colony, and the Philippines also have its Filipino society is more like Latin America than East Asia. What I mean is you have these small oligarchs who rule these vast masses who they absolutely care nothing about. But this small group of oligarchs control a lot of national sources, and they fight among themselves. And this is what's happening in the Philippines right now. Like last time when I was on the show, I told you about the gunfight in the Filipino Senate, which apparently a lot of people didn't even hear about, because this domestic issues. The Filipino president Bongbong Marcos very much like to have a distraction. That distraction, tension with China do serve as a distraction from the Filipino public, who are also very concerned about the rising prices. The developing nations in the global south, they're getting hit. They're getting hit particularly hard by the recent energy disruption, the disruption in the energy supply chain, because the rich countries can always outbid the poor country in the global oil market. You're never going to have real shortages in places like the first world countries like United States, Europe, Japan, because they have the money. They have the money to outbid the poor countries for the limited hydrocarbon resources. Philippines, Indonesia, where I'm right now, are getting squeezed really hard because they can't really afford this increasing the fuel prices. Energy is at the basis of everything. Its basis of the economy is energy, and both Philippines and Indonesia both are net energy importers. Particularly Philippines. Indonesia at least produce some oil. Indonesia produce about 600 barrels of oil per day. But the problem is Indonesia consumes 1.6 million barrels of oil per day. So Indonesia actually had to import 1 million barrels of oil. But Philippines produce very little oil. So it imports vast majority of its oil from abroad, from Persian Gulf regions. And when the Strait of Hormuz was closed, right now they're talking about opening the Strait of Hormuz, but that's going to take time. I mean, like to return to the pre-war level of the maritime traffic, it's going to take at least a year. That's assuming everything goes according to the plan. It's going to take at least a year. At least a year to restore production and to get the ship the containers to go back to the Persian Gulf, and to have the war insurance to come down, because right now the war insurance rate means each VLCC tanker is going to have to pay additional $10 million in war insurance for going to the Persian Gulf. That's not a small sum of change. So a lot of these countries, Philippines, Indonesia, India, they're all getting hit very hard at the moment. That's why their currency also depreciating versus the US dollars. It's a double whammy, and so this is what the Filipino voters would like to know. Okay, Bongbong Marcos, how are you going to solve our problem? Bongbong Marcos, like, well, the best I can do is we're going to pick a fight with China. And
I see.
It serves as a distraction, right? Nationalism is some famous guy said, nationalism is a refugee of the scoundrels, because you can always use nationalism to distract the public from other pressing issues, like how are we going to afford our transportation fees? How the farmers going to afford their diesel for their tractors? How the farmers going to get their fertilizers? Serious issues. But this is the reason the Filipino elite is choosing to be persistent in their path to serve as, U.S. palm in East Asia, to even be a Ukraine in East Asia if needs be, right? Which is itself is on a very dangerous path. So I don't think that will end anytime soon. But the silver lining, though, with the U.S. defeat, it is a U.S. defeat in West Asia, is that there is probably very less likely possibility now of another kinetic action in East Asia, because we already seen U.S. can't even do anything about Iranian control of Strait of Hormuz. Like forget about going head to head with China. So in that way, U.S. will never give up to use proxies to contain China, like what they're doing with the Philippines. This is, again, it's nothing new. I mean, you need a historical perspective on things, Jamar. Back in 1970s, when I was born, I was born in 1976, but just before that, before U.S. pulling out of Vietnam, during Vietnam War, the entire South China Sea was American lake. U.S. had military bases in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Singapore, all around South China Sea, right? Now, United States have to do this farcical freedom of navigation patrol in South China Sea just to have a show of presence, to see, hey, we're still here. We haven't left yet. This is quite different from back in 1970s when U.S. had troops all around the South China Sea, and the U.S. aircraft. There was two U.S. aircraft carrier group, the Station Yankee and Station Dixie, that was permanently stationed in South China Sea. Right, like now they just do, like now the U.S. aircraft carrier group even rarely traverse through South China Sea anymore. There's also avoid Strait of Taiwan, if possible. So if you have that perspective, you are seeing the U.S. is actually gradually being pushed out of East Asia. What U.S. has been fighting for the last decades or so is fighting a rearguard action to insist, no, we do have a right to be here. You know, this is why you hear people like Pete Hegseth say, we are a Pacific power. You know, China need to respect our right to be here. Like the thing is, China never said you don't have a right to be in California, right? Like China never said you don't have a right to be in never said you don't have a right to be in California, in Oregon. China never said that. But what United States really say, we have a right to be in East Asia, right? And Philippines was one of the last American colony in the region. You know, it serves that role as the linchpin of U.S. strategy to contain China. Again, the U.S., even though we're now at a period of a lull between U.S.-China relationship, it was a lull in tension as a result of recent Trump visit to Beijing. But U.S. military-industrial complex will never give up because their whole reason of existence is to manufacturing the tension to justify their own existence so they can continually profit from the grift from being justified $1 trillion military budget. So that will never phase out, right? So like,
Carl,
this is why I say there's no need for alarm. This is nothing new. This is okay. Go ahead. I see your.
No. I get that. What I'm pointing out is I get the historical context, but this is new. Like, this is not, we are not in the 80s. We're not in the 70s. We're not in the 90s. This is the law of the jungle. Things have fundamentally changed on the world stage in regards to the way that the U.S.
United States got its ass butt kicked out of Vietnam in the 1970s. What more can I say? I mean, like you think that things are different? You think that the relative balance of power today favors United States versus 1970s or 1950s?
No.
You know, United States was much more dominant back then. In the 1950s, United States alone possessed 50% of the world's manufacturing power, right? Even Joseph Stalin was a little bit wary of a direct conflict with the United States, right? That's why he had created many concessions to the United States, like East in Europe and also in East Asia. Soviet Union decided not to directly get involved in the war, for example. It backed China. It did send in Soviet pilots, but Soviet pilots had to dress in the Chinese uniform, fly in the planes painted with Chinese colors in order to enter Korea, because Soviet Union did not want to engage in a direct military confrontation with United States. And because U.S. back then was the hyperpower of the world. And today, U.S. was just got its ass kicked in the Persian Gulf, right? I mean, like so whatever it's doing in East Asia, this is like minor nuisance. This is like not existential. This is minor nuisance.
Let's go to the memorandum of understanding then. I mean, I think this is different. It's not that I think the U.S. power.
Look. Let me phrase it another way. U.S. will never give up on its strategic goal of being the top dog and being the global hegemon. But what right now, in the face of real resource constraint, what's more likely, U.S. will rely on proxy war, on color revolution, on regime change, on like stuff that CIA does very well, like sabotage, rather than a direct military war. Because in a direct military war, U.S. will get its ass kicked. No, let's make no mistake about it. If there's a war today between U.S. and China, the U.S. empire will be gone in a couple of hours.
I
Will
think
be
the
gone
war
in a
will be
couple
gone in a
hours.
couple hours. If
Yeah.
I'm being
So
honest. I
there's
mean,
not gonna be that kinetic World War III scenario happening anytime soon. You know, like well, hopefully not not in our lifetime, but the U.S. will never
I'm
give
not.
up on
Let
through
me explain why I'm not.
sabotage.
And why,
United States will never give up on through like the so-called hybrid warfare, right? The dirty wars, right? I mean, like this. So again, it's nothing new. I mean, U.S. have been doing this since 1950s. You know, like what they're doing right now in the Philippines is not a step up. It's not a major escalation from escalation from what they have been always doing this. They're doing the same thing they have always been doing.
Carl, it's not just the Philippines, which is my point. It's a point. It's the U.S. is vulnerable. It knows it's vulnerable. It knows it's
Did you
from the
know
world.
U.S. was
US
no listen
the
Jamar.
United States. Oh, I listened to you. Hold on. Let me make my point. I've listened to everything you said. The U.S. in all of those other situations didn't lose anything. It lost wars. It lost, let's say, standing or status or something like that. We're dealing now with a U.S. that knows it's vulnerable, A, knows it's receding from the standpoint as a global power, B, and has decided to get rid of the soft power stuff and go for direct military power, whether it's with Russia or for the matter, whether it was Iran. Yes, it got his ass kicked for Iran. It is not receding from Iran in the way that people think it is, nor is it receding from China. It is just repositioning on China. I guess I'm saying we're in a different headspace. This is not the place where the U.S. is using soft power and whatnot in its operations. Yes, it's using proxies. Yes, it's using hybrid war, but it's also desperate. That's a different animal. That's not the same as the 70s and
U.S.
the 80s.
have always been using hybrid war, Jamar. In the 1950s, CIA were flying planes out of Taiwan to bomb oil fields in Indonesia.
Yes.
I mean, I'm telling you, there was much more bloodshed back then. There's much more havoc, and they had much more capability to wreak havoc back then than they do today. So this is why I'm not pessimistic at all. I mean, I'm quite optimistic because compared to 1950s, today it's very clear the relative decline of the U.S. power. It's not that what we just had in the West Asia. That was a Suez Canal moment for the United States. Suez Canal crisis in the 1950s. That signaled the beginning of an end for the British and French Empire. Because they failed to impose. They failed to seize the Suez Canal from Egypt. Well, what we just had right now when Trump put his sign on the surrender document in Versailles of all places, that was a Suez moment for U.S. empire. This is the beginning of an end. I mean, it's not the end. It's not the end, but it's the beginning of the end. The pathway is not going to be smooth. It's in fact probably going to be very turbulent and bloody because, as you said, the empire, they will strike back. They will lash out. That's to be expected. The polar world that doesn't mean necessarily everybody holding hands and sing kumbaya around the fireplace, but it's gonna the transition. It will not be smooth. In fact, it is fraught with danger because now we're transitioning into a different international system. Now it's still kind of unknown for a lot of the players. People are still trying to find their place, but I mean, there's no reason to be pessimistic about it. That's all I'm saying.
That's fair, and it's. I think my feeling is we're sleepwalking into a war. That's my feeling. And I base that on, if you look back at World War I and you look at all of the players, all of those things were like separate conflicts, even though they ultimately ended up being in one conflict. And when I look at the world, I see the US effectively delegating responsibilities and then bitching at the people to push for those responsibilities, meaning, hey, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, we need you to deal with the China issue. Oh, and right, Australia, we need you to, die for America. And Europe, we need you to boost your military so you can fight the Russians. And the Israelis, we need you to fight meaning all of these wars are happening now. And the only reason China is not at war is because the United States is not completely insane. Right?
Well,
So,
no, I would say the only reason China is not at war because China has nukes. And China have delivery capability to send those nukes to the U.S. cities. That's why. I mean, if Iran had nukes and if Iran had ballistic missiles that could level New York and Los Angeles, we would not have this war. We would not have had this war.
By the way, how does China see the MOU? Have they made mention? I've seen in some publications that they were talking about basically, hey, we will help you develop, we will help you rebuild, we'll invest, those type of things. And I saw the Iranian.
I don't know if you saw the Iranian foreign minister actually tweeted out. He said, like, we're not going to bring the Iran-China leadership, the relationship to the forefront. I guess something must have discussed when he went to Beijing to meet with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. There must be some kind of understanding that was reached. Like they haven't made public yet, but the Iranian side are now very forthright in saying, we look forward to build a new security structure with China. And this is pretty big. This is pretty big. And also with lift of sanctions, more directly, with lift of the sanctions, that means there will be a lot more Chinese business, Chinese investment going to Iran. Because what people don't realize, even though a lot of sanctions are unilateral sanctions by United States, but a lot of times the U.S. sanctions serve as a global sanction. Because when U.S. place secondary sanctions, they will sanction anybody who will do business in Iran. That's how they got Huawei's CFO. And this is why China recently have to issue an order to domestic Chinese companies. You must not obey U.S. sanction to sanction one of our oil refiners, right? So, but with the lifting of the sanction, now, all the Chinese businesses are free to do investment, to bring investment into Iran. So I do see there's going to be a boom of business and for even though Iran is a partner of the BRI, because of the sanctions, it has been starved of the fund. A lot of the Chinese businesses, especially private Chinese businesses, are scared to go in because for the fear that they will be sanctioned by the United States. They saw what they did to Huawei CFO. That was as an example, to serve as example to the other Chinese businesses that were thinking about sanction busting. So now with the sanction lifted, Iran can be a full-fledged member in the Belt and Road Initiative, and I expect there's going to be a lot of investment, and Iran can leverage its very important strategic location, in the middle of the Eurasia, and with much Chinese, they can look forward to much Chinese investment in roads, railroads, ports, all kind of infrastructures.
Do you expect this, from your point of view, in looking at this, is the MOU, obviously it's a surrender document, right? I don't know how anybody could spin it otherwise. But it's being violated even now as we speak, immediately. So I guess my thing is there any belief that this stuff ever gets enacted in real terms from your point?
Well, I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? We'll have to see within the next 60 days. But as for China's role, China obviously played a pivotal role. There's a reason they chose Pakistan as a place of negotiation, because Pakistan has provided unique value where Pakistan has very good relationship with GCC. They have good relationship with Iran. They have good relationship with United States, and they have good relationship with China. Right. So that's why it was a middle ground for both sides to meet. And, China obviously was playing a big role behind the scenes together with Pakistan to set the table for negotiation, because China also very much want to see the Strait of Hormuz to open again. So I mean, all in all, China must be very happy about this MOU. It is a complete American surrender, lifting U.S. sanction against Iran, unfreezing Iranian asset, pulling out a U.S. military asset from the region, and this again will allow Chinese investment to pour into Iran. Then you have the statement from Iranian official, like Iranian prime minister, we are going to work closely with China to blaze ahead our partnership.
One last question: if the U.S. and Iran do come to some kind of terms in the future, whenever that future happens, would China give security guarantees to this? And by the way, when I'm thinking of this in Russia and China giving security guarantees in regards to no new attacks on its territory, those type of things. Because this deal is going to go through the UN Security Council. That's assuming the deal is ever generated. Would this, and the reason why I'm putting this out, so in the JCPOA, you had all of these European actors who effectively lumped in on the deal. None of them maintained the deal at the point where the US effectively violated when Trump shot it in the face and just destroyed the JCPOA. Instead, what Europe did was turn around and said, Iran better stay with the deal that the United States is no longer working with. If Iran wanted security guarantees from China and Russia on this, do you think they would ever entangle themselves into something like this?
Well, we have to,
I know that's a hard
security
question.
guarantee is a very broad term. Security guarantee is a very broad term. What does that mean? Will China nuke Washington if Trump does not uphold his end of the bargain? What I think Iran, though, they do have a very strong leverage. They can just close the Strait of Hormuz again. That is their very strong leverage. It's almost equivalent of an economic nuke. Yes. They have the ability to close and open at will, and there's nothing United States can do to challenge Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. I think what Iran would look for is some closer cooperation with China and Russia in terms of national security. We're probably going to talk about like maybe technological transfers, some maybe shared weapon platform, stuff like that, and I can see that happening. They can, Iran was originally trying to source some Russian fighters anyway. So I think the military cooperation will probably continue and deepen, but. I don't know. I mean, they might be looking for some kind of create some kind of new security arrangement for West Asia. But again, we don't know what kind of form that will take. Iran, Russia, and China were doing joint naval drills before the war started. But again, it sends a message. But again, we didn't necessarily seeing Russian and Chinese warship rushing to the Persian Gulf, so we'll just have to wait and see. I'm sure something is being hammered out behind the scenes. Otherwise, the Iranian foreign minister wouldn't be making such open statement on X about
Agreed.
So
no, I totally agree. Carl, you are awesome, and I appreciate the breakdown. And by the way, I understand where you're coming from. It's like, okay, dude, all of this stuff is not necessarily new. I agree with you. It's not that I think that what they're doing is new. It's the way they're acting is new, if that makes sense. They seem far more desperate than what they were prior. And that desperation has led to, they've never attacked Iran directly like this. Even back then, they used Iraq to do it. And even with the Russia stuff, they would have never did this shit in the Soviet Union. And yet, Russia is under attack as we speak. Like, this is a new level of desperation. That's all I'm pointing out. It's not that I think this stuff is radically different in the context, in the sense of tone. No. In the sense of action, I think it's different in the sense of tone, if that makes sense. But let me give you your thing. Carl Jha. Carl Jha is, if I can pull this up, there we are. Carl Jha, he's host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions, their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk letter N, and you can subscribe and support his podcast on patreon.com/silk and steel. Carl, you have a fantastic rest of your night, man. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you, Jamar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. We have come to the end. Shout out to Carl. Much appreciated him joining me tonight. Well, it's tonight for him. We have, what is this? Jabari Media. Happy Juneteenth, brother. Damn it, I can't see it. I'm sorry, Jabari. Happy Juneteenth, my brother, and to all other, what is this, clear people. They got comments on social media. Nobody cares. No, Jabari, I actually do care. I saw the thing. And even when I came on today, my first thought was it's Juneteenth. We had a conversation about it on the program yesterday about whether or not we were even going to do a show. We are going to, it's not going to be a show per se, but we're going to have our own private conversation. I am going to end this a little bit early because there's something that I definitely need to do, and something that I may be able to announce when it's finalized, but it will be of interest. Yeah, it'll be of interest. So I'll see. Yeah, it'll be good. But we have come to the end of the show. I want to thank all of you for joining me. If you guys have any questions, and maybe I need to start doing that in the way that we do it on the program. Basically, so if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat. But see, I don't have a producer to do it. On the show, Robbie does that. It's just becoming one of those things where it feels necessary. In fact, I don't even know how I did it without a producer when I was traveling. But what is this? Notice lack of XPLA guests on any indie media channels. I don't know what that's a notice thing. That's more of a availability thing, I would argue. Let's see who else. Happy Juneteenth. This is from Child of God. Let's see. Okay, right here. Hey Lou, speaking truth and truth teller, you have not understood what Jerry's channel is for. His channel is to help debunk lies and misunderstandings about China. He is not there to comment on everything. True. And Jerry is awesome, by the way. It is a beneficial thing to have someone explain something that is often lied about. I hope you get my point. If I'm covering Russian media, for example, let's say if I'm working on Sputnik, it is a beneficial thing to be able to point out that your government is lying you into a war. Period. It just is. It's beneficial as an American. It's beneficial to other Americans to know their government is lying to them and to be able to present the evidence and information to point out that they're being lied to. That is a beneficial thing from the Chinese point of view. And I would argue from the country who is watching's point of view, who knows that your government is effectively spending trillions to lie you into wars. So no, Faye, agreed. Totally agreed. Let's see, who else? Thanks, Carl. Yes, thanks, Carl. Shout out to him. Who else? Power to the people. Monte Tom, goddamn right. Let's see. Shame on China for supporting the genocide. This is, oh, really? Yeah, I'll leave that without comment. Let's see, who else? When somebody goes through all the trouble in real online, they must not have real life. China's healthiest economy on the planet. Stop living in denial. That is also probably true. I mean, look, the reality of it is, if people are having a conversation about freedom, and they say, well, America is free, but what does free mean? And don't you need a context by which to be free? Meaning, you could say the cavemen were free, fair enough, but they probably died in their 20s, and they, beat their woman on the head with clubs. I don't know if that's true. I'm just pointing it out. There's a difference between being in a cultural context that allow you to be free. I would argue there's no such thing as freedom in the earnest sense of the word. There is only degrees of a gradient of what that means. And oftentimes what you're going to have is a context that allows people to be self-actualized, meaning healthcare, education allowing the person to think for themselves, not necessarily to be controlled. Obviously, there's a certain amount of propaganda any way you look at it, anywhere where you are is where you're at. There's always an ideology. Even if the ideology is unacknowledged, it's there nonetheless. Does that ideology serve to the betterment of the person, or does it serve as a robot of state? Those things matter. Whether or not that person is healthy, how can you be self-actualized if you are not healthy? How can you, I don't know, I guess my point is, there's a context by which a person is boosted and allowed to be something. How can you be free without those things? What does it mean to be free if you are poor? What does it mean to be free if you are uneducated? What it means to be free if you're living in toxic sludge? These things, like, I'm trying to get at the point that state or the society that the person is in matters. It's not just them being an individual. The idea of kind of like a plant. It's like a plant doesn't have water, sunlight, air, etc. That plant is going to die, or at the very least, that plant is not necessarily going to be in the best of health. People are not that different. We have another chat. Let's go to that one. This is a new member, Trash Panda. Welcome to the family, Trash Panda. Or welcome back to the family, I should say, because I think you were a member before. All right, I am going to end this. Freedom is an illusion right here. Freedom is an illusion. Come back. You're not even free to decide when you're hungry. Freedom is a code word. Fool, MAGA, fool. I don't think anyone is talking about God level freedom, right? What is this? Lua Paul. I don't think people are talking about God level freedom, right? Like, and even God is stuck in a position of, okay, what does God do? Right? Like, you're God, you can do anything. Okay, what is it that you do in that moment? No, I don't think people are talking about that. I think people are talking about freedom in a political entity sense. Like, obviously, you're a person, right? You have to go to the bathroom, you have to drink water, you have to eat food, you have to breathe air. There's certain things that are required for you to exist. I think that is kind of baked into the argument. I think what people are talking about is, if I want to go skydiving, if I want to have a house for my kid, which I do consider under the issue of freedom. If you have a kid and you're living on the street, sure, you're free, but is that a freedom that you want to live on the street? Or is it a freedom to go without healthcare, a freedom to be dumb? Like, you could say that these things are freedoms, but I don't think these are necessarily freedoms that people want. All things being equal, I think people want, even if they don't know it, because I'm baking into this ideological opposition based upon how that person was raised, being somewhat of a robot, thinking that, it's kind of liberalism stuff. No, I freedom to speak, freedom to engage politically, freedom to take care of my kid, freedom to, grow educationally, freedom to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think those are freedoms that people actually do want. The question that we always end up fighting about is, how do you get those things? Right? Especially when we have political opposition that's against you having those things. I agree with you. It's an illusion. But it's the way we talk about things, for better or for worse. Okay, I am going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Is Trump a reptile? I have no idea. I'm going to say subscribe. You may see me later on today. We will see. What? What is that? Oh, okay. Audience is fighting. Great. You all have a fantastic rest of your day. Was freedom a thing during feudalism? Raymond, I am not the person to ask that. I am not a student of British history or European history in this case. Ted is probably going to be the better person to ask about that one. I mean, you were free to work on your plot of land that you needed to give revenue to the king or whoever owned the property. And from my understanding, you pretty much worked on that plot of land for your life, and ideally was going to pass it down to your kid in order to work on the same plot of land. I don't think you could be free without economic security. And I don't get the sense that that was an issue during feudalism, short of the Lord or something like that. No, I think you need, are you free without economic security? And it's not that I think you need money per se, depending on your society, but definitely latitude of action. If you don't have the financial resources in our society, your latitude of action is curtailed. Even the latitude of action of eating food is curtailed. The latitude of action of going on vacation, paying for a house, a kid, a car, just basic things that you require. Those things are out the window if you can't necessarily afford those things. And all of those things are necessary in the very most basic sense of having latitude. I mean, when we're saying freedom, we're just talking about latitude of action, and latitude of action in the various spheres of reality that we're referring to, whether it's in communication, whether it's in transportation, whether it's in what you put into your body, health, even issues of health. If you're looking at like Real Housewives in Beverly Hills, they're getting like IV injections of vitamins based on their body type and everything else. And it's like, really? I'm not against it. God bless. But that is a level of attention that most people just don't have. Most people work constantly. Most people are in constant stress because of the kids and the family and the stuff that they have to attend to, the bills that they have to pay. They don't have time for that stuff. I mean, most of their time is spent in constant stress. Let another chat. Let's go to that one. Wait a minute, did I miss one? Why am I seeing 3? That's 1. That's 2. There it is, Trash Panda. Thank you, Trash Panda. Leave a comment. Leave a comment. I like comments. I like it when people leave comments. I like it when people leave comments. All right. Well, I'm going to call this a day then, since freedom is slavery, war is peace, ignorance is strength. Yes, golden talon. Yes, that's kind of the way it works. These kind of reverse words. Never got any breaks from the transhumans. Oh, perks from the transhumans. I don't think we have transhumans yet. We don't have the ability to kind of, okay, I guess we do. Fair enough. I guess we do. I mean, the very act of a person changing their biology to be a woman and they were a man. Yeah, absolutely. That's all right, guys. You all be safe. You'll be kind. And I will see you bright and early Monday morning. Have a good one.